This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Momoko Uno. You're a doctor, author, and entrepreneur, and I want to welcome you to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing?
I'm great, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Now, we have got your link URL down there below that will be fully clickable. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. You'll be able to click through on that and other places that we're published on most podcast platforms by tomorrow. So we've got http:// momokorights.com. That will be fully clickable. We'll talk more about what that connects to. But one of the first set of questions we ask any guest is, what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
So I started off as a doctor, and I specifically wanted to study integrative medicine because I just found that many people don't do well with just one form of medicine. So I started to branch out and study lots of different things, and including, my background's in internal medicine, but I also then went to study psychology, Chinese medicine, functional medicine, etc. And then I always loved to write. And so, writing is much more of a recent thing, even though I've been, being a closet writer for probably over 10 years. Well, actually, since I was, 3 years old, probably. I was just always too shy to really share any of my writing. But so a lot of my writing is, I think, reflects my work too. And, I wanted to share it with more people. And so I got into writing that way.
That's really cool because I think a lot of times people, like in the West, I'm in New Hampshire, USA. A lot of people are starting to deal with homeopathic or more Eastern-based medicines because they're finding that, the Western medicine tends to be very narrow and focused on, doing things like surgeries and medicines and pharmaceuticals without considering the whole of the human history.
Absolutely.
And a lot of other practices that maybe got, but indigenous people from the East and from other places that actually have value, but they kind of minimized it. And now people are starting to look for things that their doctor won't even entertain. So I think that's, it's been a common thread on our podcast. We've talked to a lot of people in that space.
Very good.
But in terms of like overcoming trauma and finding resilience, like what some of the factors in doing that with what you practice?
Well, I think that there's a lot more information about trauma now and how much is actually stored inside the physical body. It's not so much in the brain, but in the rest of the body. And I think it gets trapped in our muscles. Like, for example, if you're afraid or something, you can imagine yourself kind of like hunching over and, ducking or something. And there's a muscle memory that stays inside the body. So it's very important, not only just to change your mind about how you think about what's happened to you, but also to get that energy out of your body, because if you don't, it then starts to dictate how you think as well, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people, they don't think of all the aspects of their life that are connected. There's a lot of interconnectedness, and in terms of like what you eat and
Absolutely.
what you feel, and it's not just the physical. So there's a lot of things that you might be too late when you have the physical manifestation, when you were already feeling some other things and you just couldn't pin it down.
Absolutely. Yes. Like a lot of people, there are a lot of people love coffee, right? And sometimes I'll get a patient who says that they're drinking 10 cups of coffee a day and they're wondering why they're feeling so anxious and can't sleep. And I always try to be quite gentle about the way that I give them that feedback that might be somehow contributing to their anxiety or inability to sleep. But that's a very specific example.
Yeah, the interconnectedness of life is like a lot of people, like words. Oh, words don't matter, and then they're hung up on triggers that come from words. So
absolutely.
People, they'll say, well, words don't matter, but it seems like that's where your thoughts are all day from getting triggered, and you don't understand your triggers. And so, yeah, there's a lot of holistic concepts that a lot of times, being an artist, I try to think of things from more holistic perspective because it's not always just coming from logic. A lot of times things come from like, the ether or the muse or the universe. And so more willing to entertain that, like
Absolutely.
as an
Artists,
artist.
yes,
But
artists are so much more receptive, I think, to the universe, emotional energy, connected with other people often, can read people better, the energy of a room, for example. If you get
yeah,
a bad vibe in a room, you usually pick up on that. There's I think a high level of sensitivity.
yeah, it goes into like energy. There's a lot of people talk about like, light healing and different types of, things that are more vibrational because,
Yes,
we're full of electricity,
absolutely.
and, in terms of music, I'm a synthesist. And so I deal with like waveforms. And I
Yes.
understand that certain waveforms trigger certain responses because as a musician, I can see it.
Oh,
Like if I have
absolutely.
certain rhythmic waveforms, I can get people to be dancing. I could get people to be kind of, in a grunge concert, they're banging around like, you can change like the mood of the whole crowd through frequencies and vibrations. And as a
Absolutely.
musician, you
Yes.
can see immediate results. But as a speaker, you can too, because if you learn that your voice is an instrument,
Yes.
so if you learn how to talk in a calming way, then you're probably going to have a calming influence. If you're very aggressive and you're very like have an attack type of pattern and it's very loud, it's like you can trigger different behaviors by the way you modulate your voice.
Oh,
In the same way
absolutely.
that a singer can, have a romantic move or any kind of, so just having the connectedness is like, oh, your actions actually can affect and your non-actions affect and the vibes there. And you can read it. You can, should you read the room or should you just go off the script? Like if you're giving a speech and it's dying, and it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't go by the script. Maybe you should like read what's going on in that time.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's hard to know exactly how you're communicating with your energy. I get that feedback from my children quite a lot. They don't like the tone that I'm using, even though I think I'm being lovely, you know?
Yeah, it's hard to
Yeah.
judge. A
Yeah. Oh,
lot of our things
yes.
like artists, we can't judge our own work.
No, no, no. It's hard. It's hard.
We have to have other people like say, "Well,
Yes.
that's good," because we probably it's like, "Well, I don't think it's good." So like one of the concepts I maybe want to dive into is like in terms of the holistic concepts. Maybe you can kind of give us like some backgrounds or maybe top concepts or
Of
ideas.
holistic healing, you mean? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah,
Well, so holistic means the whole. So that includes not just the body, but the mind, the emotions, and then the spirit. Of course, not everybody is open to spirituality, or so that's always a little bit tricky when working with somebody who considers themselves an atheist. But I think most people have the understanding that their energy at least will affect other people. So we can just kind of, I can see it from that perspective, or maybe their super ego, their most evolved part of who they are, their consciousness. So I try to work on all of those because I just said all those different levels are kind of interconnected, much like ice, water, and steam is. They're just different states of the same
mm-hmm.
thing.
Yes,
So
of the same element.
yeah. So I try to work at it from that perspective because if it's affecting your body, it's probably affecting your spirit too, and vice versa. So I try to address things on all the different levels to affect positive change for patients.
Some folks might have a hard time with the kind of inner work that has to get done
They
because there's so
do.
many people are looking for like the magic pill
Yes.
or the 10 steps that's going to be, oh, then I'm done.
Yeah.
And what I've found is a lot of times things are like you have to have like daily practices or things that you make part of your life to maintain. Like
Absolutely.
if you're an addict, you're probably gonna be an addict your whole life and you have to maintain.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yeah.
and if you don't maintain it, you're gonna slip. So it's not easy. Just like life isn't easy, but I think a lot of people are looking for the quick fix.
Agreed. And you kind of have to think of it as a medication that you need to take for long term. Like, for example, if you have like blood pressure issues, right? Taking one pill once in your life it's probably not going to help you a whole lot. It's one of those things that you have to maintain every single day. It's kind of like the same with your emotional and mental health. You have to, there's that saying, I don't eat junk food, I don't think junk thoughts. And so you kind of have to work on yourself, like making sure that you don't think junk thoughts. That's really hard. That's much harder than remembering to take a pill or, eating vegetables or something.
Because, the pessimism can come in, and then a lot of times people have like imposter syndrome and they don't feel they're good enough. And so they've got these kind of, doubting ideas that just keep on creeping into their head.
Yes.
Like if you're there and you're worried and you're so anxious, like, oh, I'm not going to get it right. Well, then you're probably not going to get it right if you keep on thinking you're going to fail. And it's not ostentatious or, sometimes people look at people like, well, how can they be so arrogant? It's not necessarily that they're arrogant. They just believe in themselves. That they're not, I guess they're confident in their capabilities. Not that you don't know that you have more to learn. But you have to at least have a baseline to be able to function.
Yeah. This Buddhist teacher once said to me, telling yourself that you're not good enough or you're no good is like, it's like emotional suicide. And he said, you have to figure out a way not to do that because you will self-sabotage your entire life.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult.
It's difficult.
Because a lot of times, people are scared to like raise their hand to actually come up with their opinion because it's not the group opinion, right? It's not the standard like in the box concept. So a lot of times, it's like, well, how come we're only getting things from the small group of people who are creating all the innovation? Because you've kind of told people from the beginning when they get into the educational system that, not everybody's going to rise to the top. So a lot of people are scared to even be authentic. And their vulnerability is they're so scared. They want to stay safe.
Absolutely. And
how do you get people to be more adventurous?
It's a good question. I find that it takes something pretty significant that happens in your life to break through that barrier. Like, for example, for me, it was almost dying that made me decide that I wanted to write my first book. So usually something has to really shake you up. And then you decide, oh, all right, life is short. Like, I want to do something to change or share with the world something about myself. And it might not be perfect, but it's worth sharing anyway.
Well, I think that's always interesting because a lot of times it's that it's like crucible moment that kind of you hit it and then you realize, well, here's what I did before and here's how now I'm gonna learn from this event. It's like a life lesson learned and you have new strategies and you get beyond it. Like I'm a cancer survivor. At age 27, I had a level 3 sarcoma. And there are things before the cancer that I was like fearful of public speaking, things I wouldn't do, scared to travel. And then when I survived it, I'm like, if I can survive that, then what am I scared of these things for? So then I can push myself and challenge myself because like if I can get through that, and I think what I've run into a lot of survivor stories, people from the sexual assaults, people from domestic violence, is like once they get like the tools and they learn how they can manage and be, actually thrive. It starts to change their mindset.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, being able to work through something very, very difficult, like what you went through and other people who've been assaulted or go through traumatic things, it strengthens people, I think. And then there's also an understanding that I think that life is really short and that we can want to make the best out of what we have here.
In the arts, like trauma seems to be the primary mover. Like a lot of times, if you talk to like a lot of singer-songwriters, their best material is because they were in like melancholy or they went through some kind of like negative experience that caused them to create that piece of art because they were able to try to synthesize and be cathartic with their art form, whether they're a painter, a musician, or an actor. they take that pain and they learn how to mold it into art. And
Absolutely.
and a
Yes.
lot of people don't know how to do that. Like creatives know how to do it, but you don't have to be a creative to learn how to do that. You can find other paths for that kind of energy.
Yes, agreed. And I think this is where people start to either shut down or find some kind of creative process to move beyond their challenging experiences. And it's not that, we would forget necessarily what happened. That's not really the point, but to be able to flow through or coexist with whatever traumatic experience that we've been through.
Yeah, you process. So you can kind
Yeah.
of process the pain and you turn it into this piece of work where you actually like work through it because you're actively are like the looking glass. A lot of the poets or the Victorian poets talked about the looking glass self. And
Uh,
then we kind of would be like you're gonna look in the mirror, you're gonna self-examine, and then you're gonna write poetry about that. You're gonna write art about that. You're gonna
yes.
process it and then get through it. Not that you forget it or totally leave it behind because it's part of you, but
Yes.
you learned to use it to get to the next point in your life.
Absolutely. And I don't think that, stories that are just fun, 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 positive, happy, happy, it's not that interesting anyway. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, the happy stuff doesn't like well, it's some people, you can make a funk song, you could do a disco song, you could do something that's a club banger.
Oh, sure,
Yeah,
sure,
you
sure.
can
Yeah.
make people happy, but it still
Yeah.
could have come from a place where you weren't happy. And that's the trick. Is like a lot of times artists is like they get into that coming from a different place. And then they
Yes.
work through it and it becomes like joyful, but it might
Sure,
not have
sure.
started that way. So it still ends up being the impetus.
I think so. I think also to understand joy and happiness, you need the contrast of the pain to really appreciate it, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's definitely there's a lot of paths. So what kind of paths do you or I guess strategies or things that people can do to overcome trauma? Like I've been talking about like art therapy, but from your perspective, what are other ways of doing that?
I think it's most important to get it out of the body. And if through some kind of physical movement. If you like to dance, that's great. I think dancing or any kind of movement therapy. But the key is as you're moving the energy out through your body to be experiencing positivity while you're doing it. Like if you're dancing, like if you like to dance and you're experiencing joy while you're dancing and you're moving your body, it's perfect. And to make sure that you use your entire body to get it out. Most trauma is actually most of it's in the torso. If
Hmm.
it's sexual trauma, obviously it's going to be lower down, like around the genitals, and if you want to talk about chakra systems, like first and second chakra, like lower down, underneath the belly button, right?
Hmm.
Or in the chest area, sometimes for some women, and different traumas are in different parts of the body, but the majority of it is in the torso. So learning how to move your torso through movement as you're starting to have positive feelings, that will help to move the energy out, but also to then absorb positivity as you're doing that, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. It's like understanding how your body and your mind and your spirit and your soul is connected to that movement. I think that's
Yes.
very interesting. Maybe you can kind of maybe talk deeper about the chakras and the things that you were referring to, because a lot of people from Western perspective, they maybe don't fully get that. They don't fully understand it unless they've started to practice it. Maybe you can kind of do an
Yeah.
introduction.
Oh, sure, sure. So the first chakra is like around your bottom, and that actually has mostly to do with your. It's called the root chakra, and it's mostly to do with like family and ancestors, and then also your relationship to the earth. Yeah, and just humanity in general. And if you've had an assault, sexual assault, that's going to be affected. And usually, people become very afraid of humanity in general. So that's a trauma in that area. And the second is specifically more to do with sexual relationships. Yeah. Um, People who have, it might not even be a traumatic experience, but if you have like a partnership that's not great and you're absorbing negativity from that, that you might have areas of women that would be in the uterus, men like in the prostate, like that area in general. And then the third chakra, which is just above your belly button, it's kind of like around your stomach area, is your relationship with yourself. And so when you feel like that area often gets very affected, like when you feel overwhelmed and you feel like you can't take any more in, like you just can't take more stress. And that usually starts coming out more like as like your stomach problems. Like you literally can't eat, like you have problems eating usually because you can't stomach another issue. So that's very much to do with the third chakra. And the fourth is your chest, it's your heart, and it's your ability to have compassion, love for yourself, and then for others. And then the next chakra is the throat chakra, which is to do with self-expression mostly. So that's also going to be around your thyroid and your voice box. So if you're constantly having problems around your throat, you want to ask yourself, am I holding back speaking my truth? Because that's often, to do with, your throat chakra. And then moving up to the sixth chakra, that's to do with intuition, clarity of mind. So if you have challenges with, if you have trauma, this one gets affected easily because you have a tendency of constantly seeing your past trauma and it gets projected into the future, into other people or into the future. So it's very, very important to work on that if you've had trauma. And then the last one, the seventh or the crown chakra, is to your relationship with, the universe, God, whatever you like to call it, the spirit world.
There's a lot of integration, it seems, between like all the points
Yes.
in your body.
Yeah, it's a continuation, like a rainbow. Like you start off at the first as a red and then you go up to violet. Correct.
And then there's number 7, and there's a lot of mythology about 7, but there seems to be a lot of universal kind of connectedness, or the kind of stuff that people who are more, I don't know, they're in tune with like the universe.
Yes.
Are more likely to not poo-poo that and actually believe it, rather than someone who says, oh, well, I'm just left, right brain. I'm like only going to be only logic brain. So I can't buy that. And then they get caught up in these things, but they don't want to move out of their discomfort or out of their situation because they're not willing to like entertain expansion of the mind and the body and the soul and the spirit.
Yes.
You pretend to be kind of very limited belief systems.
Absolutely. And that, that kind of, would that be left brain, the person who's very, very rational? I've forgotten which I'm getting confused on. But yeah, it's important to have like a mix, I think, a balance of the left and the right, the creative as well as the logical. And when you have a more balanced, when you have a more balanced, then I think you tend to be a little bit more open, rather than just kind of skewing off to one side. And then it's kind of harder to ascend and have some kind of, I think, higher connection if you're way too just creative without logic, or just too logical without the create. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a balance. There's like
there's a balance.
Being able to be like in harmony. Like in music, we have concepts like dissonance and noise and discordance and then harmony. Now, in a song, you could have parts of that song are discordant. They got parts of it that are noise, parts of it are like, dissonant. But really what's going to bring people in is the harmony part, the melody part, the part that like, oh, I can connect to that. Oh, you can feel that. But you can use all those forms. And it's a matter of like balance. And certain forms might be more discordant, like punk music is very dissonant and discordant. You might not be able to stay in that without causing a lot of like discordance in your own life. Like if you sometimes you can only be in some forms for a certain period, or maybe you feel that moment, but you probably don't want to live in that moment for your whole life.
Correct. At least I wouldn't want to. Maybe some people enjoy it. I don't know.
But yeah, it just seems like sometimes like you have to understand like balance, and like some people was like, well, I like the thing that's like that, but then it's like if it's too loud, it damages your ears. Like
absolutely.
If it's too negative, it'll cause like you have negative thoughts, and so you might like it, but is it actually really good for you? And so it's a matter of like, just because you like something doesn't mean it's like it's going to give you the proper balance.
No, absolutely. It's kind of like I would love to eat McDonald's and pizza every single day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But is that necessarily balanced? No, I mean, I think we can pretty much all agree to that balance is very, very important. But the tricky thing is, I think sometimes balance doesn't feel great either.
No, Well,
It's
sometimes you're, as an artist, if you're out of balance or you're in imbalance in the moment of creation, you're kind of in this kind of chaotic thing. That could be, it might not feel like very, like a lot of harmony. It could be a lot of disharmony
yes.
in the creation process. And then you work through it and then you get to harmony or you get to satisfaction where you get to the, so, oh, now I see the light. But it's
Ah,
like you're working through it. And so there's like, it's like an ocean wave. You could be on, really calm seas. And then to get to port, you might get through a storm and then
mm,
you get to port. But that's the whole experience is like, it's not going to all be calm ocean. Sometimes it's not. And sometimes you have to work through that.
yes. Yes.
So that's the hard part of life is like, it's not always going to be that perfect balance, but maybe it's like learning your triggers and learning how to respond to the bad weather. Yeah, how do you respond to those waves? How do you navigate that tricky ocean? How do you deal with them?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, when we're younger, when we see that big wave coming in, there's often like a triggered panic reaction. And as we go through life and we've gone through some of those big tsunamis and realized that we didn't die, when you see another one coming through, you're like, I got this.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you learn like the general. Like the general could be in a war and they
Yes.
can see through the chaos. They can plan. Well, other
Yes.
people who like they can't even respond because they have no idea what to do. It's that person that can kind of see through the chaos and still map a way to get through it. Not
Absolutely.
everybody can do that, but you can try to learn better tools on how could you weather that? How can you get through that?
Yeah, that takes a lot of life experience. So I think
Yeah,
it's
it's
not easy to navigate through, especially if you're young, and also if you've had very well-meaning parents who've did
mhm.
everything for you and sheltered. You've had kind of a sheltered life, and you're out in the real world dealing with difficult people and situations, and you've never really had to struggle. It's
Yeah.
it's going to be hard.
That's the problem. If you shelter people, then you're not really protecting them.
No,
Like
not at all. It's temporary, right?
yeah, because like once you get out in the world, like you need ability to handle the triggers, to handle the responses, and know what's the correct response for the situation, so you don't go from 0 to 100 when it's not necessary. That we have
Yes.
all this like flight. Uh,
Yes.
you know, you whether or not we have a lot of our cortisol. I know a little bit about that, but it's like if the wolf is at the door, but there's no wolf, it's like some trigger
Yes.
going back to where you want to feel safe, and then there's all these things making you feel not safe.
Absolutely.
So how do it's in the saber tooth's not at the door, but it feels like it's at the door.
Absolutely. And that's the thing about trauma and PTSD is that you think that that tiger's outside your door waiting for you all the time or often. And that's really tricky to then retrain yourself and say, no, that's just a friendly domestic cat.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to get through
Oh,
because I
it's
know.
rough.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of times we don't get taught
No,
those type of things, and it's like
no.
those are things that you have to go find somebody like yourself to like that's addressing that.
Yes.
Where the other types of thing, well, just take this pill or just do this and do, and it's like that's just putting a band-aid. It's not
Yes.
solving like the core problem. A lot of times we don't go to the core of
Yeah.
what the problem is. We kind of put a band-aid on it.
Yes. Yeah. The band-aid's nice for a short period of time. It's great. You need the band-aid occasionally, but it's not going to work in the long run. And the other thing that you mentioned, like we spend so much time in school, just even through high school, learning how to do all these incredibly difficult, like for example, math, right? I don't
Mhm.
remember any math at all. I can barely count to 20. And but I spent a lot of time doing that, and it did nothing for my emotional well-being. It gave me no skills to cope in life. And I think it's unfortunate that school is so focused on academic things and not, I mean, I know that they're trying to
Yeah,
teach
they're important.
children
Yeah.
more emotional intelligence, but I think they could be doing more. I see my kids and their friends struggling with anxiety and depression, and yeah, there could be more done so that they know how to they can recognize that that tiger's not outside their door, and they can recognize that, oh, I'm in fight or flight right now.
Yeah, a lot of the problems are like the sciences are so, we're living in the 21st century, everything's tech. So
Yeah.
everybody thinks everybody's got to know logic to an nth degree so they could be a programmer, they could be an analyst, they could be an engineer. But not everybody's got the mindset to be an engineer, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea that the other types of things like the sociologies, the psychologies, like the arts, like people don't understand. Like a lot of the arts are integrated into this tech, and they minimize the art value, like in the value of being like a creative. You come up with ideas that are not maybe mathematical, but they can be like Da Vinci. Like Da Vinci was this person that could do both, right? He could
Yes.
do the art and the math, like a Renaissance person.
Yes.
And then you still need that type of mindset, but they're like undervaluing those
It's
other skills.
I think it's very unfortunate. I think that kids should be learning more about music and art. It's very important for brain development. It helps you with problem solving, thinking outside the box, and it's shortchanging children.
Yeah, because there's a lot of skill sets. Like, music is very mathematical, whether people want to understand it or not, but it runs
Sure.
on scales that are
Yes.
mathematical, timing that's mathematical, and the structure of the
Yes.
of the songs, and this understanding the keys and the notes and how to keep things in the right tone. And then the ability to have like team work, like everybody talk, with the soccer team, the football team, but if you're in an orchestra or a band, it's the same kind of teamwork, and it's like
Yes.
kind of intuitive teamwork. There was like a lot of nonverbal stuff that you
Yes.
learn how to actually work with people in a
Absolutely.
different way than a football player does. But if you're in a band, like you learned a lot of skills that are actually valuable in terms of connection. You're actually connecting on a level that's a little higher because it's like all this, there's the sound and the connection and the timing. You learn how to work in a different way that's more esoteric, and it's a really good skill set to have because then you start to pick up the vibes.
Oh, absolutely. Of
And
other
then
people.
and then when you do that, communication skills are like, the CEOs will tell you like, oh, communication is like really core. Then why aren't you teaching it?
Yeah.
It's like you spend all your time on math and you don't teach people how to communicate.
Yeah, that's another thing that's also, I think, that schools could focus more as communication skills, and not just talking, but how to listen too,
Yeah,
and how to
listening.
listening is it's most people don't really listen.
But it's an art,
Oh my gosh, yes,
because if you find like a lot of people, they're in this kind of game where they want to win, right? So when
yes,
they're in a conversation, they're thinking about the thing they want to say rather than listening to what you're saying in the moment.
yes,
So they really
yes.
don't hear anything you said.
No,
And they're also framing it with their perspective without trying to actually listen. And they don't actually come up with good questions because their questions tend to be like their own point of view without trying to say, what did you really mean by that? When do you ever ask that? People just assume what you meant and then get triggered and
absolutely.
don't dive into a real in-depth type of rapport. Did you actually get what I was saying?
Yes. Yeah. So when I went to school to study psychology, we actually had to be trained how to listen. And we spent a lot of time learning how to listen. It's actually not that easy, believe it or not. And, in my practice, I spend a lot of time just trying to understand my patients. And if I don't understand them, I'll keep asking until I really understand. And I think it helps them to feel validated because I'm then validating their experience for them and understanding how they're feeling. And I think they feel heard, and that's very important in terms of with healing and in general communicating, right? Like we speak because we want to be heard, not right.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times people don't understand, like they assume that the words you're using are understood, but people sometimes have different concepts of words.
Oh, absolutely.
So if
Yes.
you grew up in a certain household and there's certain words that trigger you or your understanding was based on a very dysfunctional
Yes.
type of situation.
Yes.
Your perception of that word or that phrase is different than what this other person just assumes. And if you never really ask them, like, what do you feel when you say this?
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me an example? Can you tell me a story? People don't dive into it and try to fully understand what did somebody really mean when they said X.
Yes.
Try to understand what X is and how that makes that person feel rather than just how it makes you feel.
Absolutely. And taking that time to ask that question. So what does this word mean to you? How do you use this word? What's your historical context of that word? Because different cultures use different words differently, right? It's
Yeah.
We're very much becoming so much of an international, global community, and I think we get into trouble because words don't often mean the same thing to other
Yeah, it's
people.
totally. I ended up working in Tokyo for a couple of years, and I had interpreters and translators. And then what I learned is like, you know what? I'm going to use what are called like activity diagrams, which are like flowcharts, which were kind of like universally understood because they were really logical patterns. So if I was trying to describe a process, instead of trying to put it into English and translate to Japanese or Japanese back to English, I go on a whiteboard and I use like recognized symbols that were understood in engineering. That no matter whether you knew Japanese or English, you
Gotcha.
understood the logic flow. And I was able to get better understanding by using the pictures, which is kind of like a typical human understanding goes back thousands of years, that the pictures
Yes.
are actually going to
Yes.
represent something that's actually closer to what somebody can understand.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely makes sense, and it's interesting because the Japanese language is the characters they're all about pictures too.
Yeah,
So in
which I thought
that
that would make more sense to me.
yeah, totally, absolutely.
So they're actually like it's like a pictogram. He's like they actually, you look at river like Kawa is like
Oh my
it
gosh,
looks like a
totally.
river. It
Yes,
looks like a river. And it's like and so so if you actually do something that's logically taking a process from A to Z and
yes,
logically showing where it goes,
yes,
it's a diagram and it was fully understood and there was no debate. It's like what does that word mean? It's like no, this is a flow. It's going in to out, out to in. So if you can really dive into people's conversations and what they say and what they mean, it's super important. 'Cause I was a sociology major and we looked
um,
at, the microcosm and the macrocosm. See, the microcosm is kind of like individual,
yeah,
like within a family. And then that family is in a neighborhood, in a neighborhood is a part of the city, and then the
yes,
city's part of the state and is part of the country. And that gets into the macrocosm. But something from the macrocosm can affect the microcosm can affect the macrocosm. It's a two-way street. And so you can see how behavior from like the anatomy of a riot to social revolutions and behavior at group levels and individual levels. And you start to understand why, like, how can somebody else fire and people trample on each other? Or people
yes,
go and do something like a riot, somebody throws a rock and then other people get the permission structure to throw a rock. And you're like, wow, like you can really start to see group behavior and then you can understand the consequences of what you do.
absolutely. It's actually something that's it's quite scary. The like group consciousness of some. When people have one person has an angry response and it just kind of it's almost like anger is infectious, right?
It's like
And
an infection. Yeah. It's like the
yeah,
body. And then people start to radiate the same frequency. And then
yes,
that frequency can be destructive. And you
yes,
can see it in patterns, and you can see social patterns throughout history where you have these very destructive events and they're
yeah,
triggered by you know, these type of situations. And you
yes,
study these situations, and it's like, wow, well, what happened here? You start to, and it seems like people don't have the empathy or the willingness to go and see what happened before, and are there parallels to what's happening now? And
yes.
just don't just live in the moment. Don't, as an artist, we like to live in the moment. Sometimes you need to look at the totality of something,
Oh,
the holistic
absolutely.
nature, and then try to not just be in your narrow lane and only think within that narrow focus and not see the bigger picture.
Absolutely. We're not like living in a vacuum with, you know,
Yeah.
sterile environment. It's
Yeah. There's a
not,
lot of
doesn't
things
have
that are
a,
just like global now. I mean, it's something you
yes.
do can affect like the global structure of the planet.
Yeah. And very quickly too now.
Yeah, you're like, so it's not just like, oh, I can just do this. Like maybe not. Maybe you can't just throw mercury in the water. And you're like, because it doesn't matter. It's like, yeah, it does matter. But it's like that mercury in the water you can do with your voice. Like if you don't realize what you're doing.
Oh, yes. I think that a lot of people don't understand how much the way that they speak can impact other people. And it's something I hear about quite a lot, especially of somebody who has authority and
Mhm.
is talking to employees like a boss, and their negativity and how much it can really create negativity, and employees can just hate going to work.
But
It's just
yeah, I mean, it's not
miserable.
very productive. It's like having this
No.
top-down dictatorial
Yeah.
approach is not going to be as empowering. Like if you have a workplace where you have a lot of people not scared to show their vulnerability, not scared to raise their hand,
Yeah.
not scared to actually give an idea out,
Yes.
and then you have these very productive environments. You get examples like like the Apples and the Googles, is like where people actually come up with these really innovative ideas versus
Yes.
maybe a top-down structure within a warehouse that's just sending out packages, and everybody's just told that you got to follow this robotic mindset, and if you can't even go for a bathroom break, very top down. Not, but
Yes.
in that environment, you could have creativity if you allowed it, and you probably could have increases in productivity and new ideas, but you don't want it. You want a robot.
Yeah.
You get the robot, though, they're probably going to get upset, and they're not going to show up, or they're going to quit, and you're going to keep on getting turnover because you're not making it so it's in like a human environment. Somebody doesn't want to be a robot. Humans aren't built to be robots.
No, that's something that you can only do, short term. It's very difficult to maintain those types of roles.
Yeah, it's difficult when you don't actually encourage creativity. And some roles don't demand it, but there are places where you could, have a level of innovation if you make people feel like they're involved. You know,
Yes, absolutely. Their opinion matters. Yeah.
yeah, you could be in a small bakery or a restaurant and people feel like they can actually say something to the boss, and
Yes.
they feel like they can be involved and they have an ownership in the company. Then
Yes.
they'll be willing to say, hey, maybe we should try this or maybe we should do that. They're not going to say anything if you don't treat them like they should be saying anything. If you feel like, well, they shouldn't say anything to me at all, well, that's what you're going to get. They're not going to talk to you.
Yes, absolutely. And to be, as a leader, to be open to listen to criticism, I think is so important, because you're ultimately going to become better at what you do. But a lot of bosses and leaders, they don't want to take any kind of negative feedback.
It's
And
funny because they'll
yeah,
say they want it, but when you give it, then you end up being on the outs.
yes, you get fired, right?
Yeah,
For
because they'll tell everybody, yeah, our corporate policy is that we have. Then you try it and see what happens. If because they like to talk the talk. There's a lot of things that people are like, well, yeah, we like to do this. We subscribe to that, but then they really don't. And you're like, okay, well, this you just if it's a name only, it's not real. People know that, and they will feel that. So you just can't write it down on the page and not make it a living, breathing policy. Just
yes,
creating a policy so you have it on paper is not good enough.
no, you have to walk the talk, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's like I see a lot of that in corporate world, but but that's either there here or there. But maybe you could give maybe in closing, could we kind of get near the end? But are there some like maybe top 3 lessons learned over your practice and what you've been doing that the audience could really take uh, you know um, some lessons from that, from something you've learned or experienced yourself?
I think that for me, you know, receiving negative feedback, criticism, in terms of as a writer, is probably the best thing that they're like gems, criticism, because that's how we get better. And I've been in so many different writing classes, and I've watched people not handle negative feedback very well. They'll shut down, they'll disappear, and I'll never see them again. Of course, giving criticism is learning how to do that is important, but
Hmm.
but learning how to take criticism and not to be seen as you're a bad person, but really as an opportunity to grow, make yourself better at your craft, just seeing it that way, like, oh wow, this is great. It's so hard to do because it feels like part of you is getting killed off when you get feedback. Like somebody once told me in my writing that she said, I'm having trouble staying awake reading this.
Oh, might not
rough.
be the best criticism.
It is rough, right? But it's it's like heartbreak reading it. But then I really want to think about it and to make it more lively or engaging or something. So that's been a really important lesson, and I think a lot of people stop themselves because they want to be perfect.
Yeah, perfection. Perfection
rough.
is the enemy of creativity.
Absolutely. So, and I like to think about like it's just good enough is good enough for me. Yeah. Not to say that I want to keep getting better, but in the moment it just has to be good enough because otherwise you will never finish.
Well, in music, we think about like bad notes or opportunities. Like if I hit the wrong note, if I'm with a group that's kind of evolved, the group will play off that note and actually use a note that goes with it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Instead of stopping and starting all over again. Right. So if you're a musician and you've been experienced and you hear the perceived bad note, you're like, well, that's an opportunity to kind of take the song in a different direction, and I'll actually run in that key now, or I'll change the whole structure to go that way. And the person that's so into something being perfect, they'll stop the whole recording and start again.
Yeah.
Until you hit it exactly the way they want it written. And they lose the opportunity to evolve the piece. And a lot of times in music, it's like when you actually make that happy accident mistake, it actually makes better music.
Yeah,
When
I can
you're
see
willing
that.
to accept it and go with it, a lot of good pieces of music are made that way.
Yes, I can see that. Not that I know anything about music, but I appreciate the concept.
Yeah, it's the same thing. You can talk about writing or acting. If you get a method actor and they go off the script, but because they felt like they actually learned the character, the director could go say, well, no, do it the way I wrote it. The screenwriters like, go, no, do it the way I wrote it. But if they're involved and say, hey, this actor actually got into this role and they got it. They got it better than what I wrote.
Yes.
And they actually can take it and you're willing to actually go with how they interpreted it.
Yes,
and,
yes.
That's the same thing happens a lot. And, it's like you said, if you get the red mark, like you have an English professor and they red mark your whole paper and you're like, oh, you just hate it. You hate it. It's like, we're like, oh man, I dread coming here because he's just going to red mark it. And I had a professor that instead of doing that, they had this really good way of actually talking through it and, sitting you in the office and talking you through it and showing you where you made your mistake, but not kind of using the red to show how stupid you are, right? When you feel like, oh, you could have said it like this. So it's kind of like how you do it. And not everybody has the ability to be that way.
No.
And so, but I felt like, well, I love that professor's technique. Maybe I should learn from that.
Yes.
If I ever give somebody advice, maybe I should try to do it like that.
Absolutely. That's also an art to giving feedback. Not easy to do.
Yeah, it's hard because your gut reactions. Oh, you did it wrong. Like you're trying to train somebody. It's like, oh, what are you doing? It's like, don't you know how to do it? Didn't you read the manual? You're supposed to do it like ABC. It's like there's it's, before you do that, maybe you gotta stop yourself and have some empathy.
Yeah,
but it's hard to do that.
It is. It's very hard to do, especially as a professional person who has a lot of experience and you're coaching somebody who's a beginner. I think that learning how, depending on what level you are in your craft, that your feedback has to be a little bit different.
Yeah. You got to know who's in the room. Like, if you got somebody that doesn't know what you know, they're not going to have 20 years. So they're not going to know what you know. So it's like understand where they are and go from that perspective.
Exactly. So that's
it's like the teacher that gets only 5% of the class to actually do well is not the best teacher.
No.
And they used to measure, well, the kids are not, no, the teacher actually is doing something wrong. They're not connecting. If the higher percentage of their students actually can hit better grades, then they're actually communicating better.
Yes, agreed.
So
Yes.
that's sometimes in American education, it's not thought of that way. It's like, oh, the kids there's something wrong with the kids. It's like, maybe there's something wrong with the teacher.
Yes. Agreed.
But thank you again for being on the show. But I want to dive into your URL. Like, if people click on your URL, what do they find at your momokowrites.com?
It has some information about my 2 books, obviously, and then there's some basic information about overcoming trauma, and because a lot of trauma is about learning how to breathe slowly. So there's some exercises that are very, very simple that people can read about. So, and I also have my I shouldn't say professional, but my medical website, which is omniwellnessnyc.com, which is, bio, and it's a multidisciplinary wellness center. So that's all the, much more the medical information is on a different website.
Okay. Well, that's that. We do encourage everybody to click through, because that will be clickable. And anything you want to dive into more, you'll be able to go into your books and check out, everything that's on your website. We do encourage all the viewers and listeners that when they check out the descriptions of the podcast, they'll be able to click through on the URLs that our guests provide. Again, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank
We do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
Thank you. You
Good night,
too.
depending on where you are.
Thanks.